Maria Thompson was trusted by everyone at Jackson County Jail, but behind her friendly smile, she was orchestrating a dangerous game of deception, smuggling, and abuse of power that would shock everyone when it was finally exposed. Maria Thompson had always been seen as the ideal employee. From the moment she stepped into Jackson County Jail, she carried herself with a confidence that was both reassuring and impressive. Her uniform was always immaculate, her hair perfectly in place, and her demeanor calm and composed. She knew the routines of the jail better than anyone, and she seemed to understand both the staff and the inmates in a way that made her indispensable. Supervisors trusted her implicitly, giving her responsibilities that others would never have dared to handle. Inmates, too, seemed to gravitate toward her, some out of respect, others out of curiosity, but all sensing that she wielded a quiet authority. At first, Maria's ambition showed only in her meticulous work ethic. She arrived hours before her shift began, often volunteering for extra duties, checking inventories, and keeping logs flawlessly updated. She had an eye for detail that bordered on obsessive, noticing small anomalies in the jail's operations that others overlooked. These minor observations gave her a sense of superiority. She felt she could see the system in its entirety, predicting what would happen before anyone else could. But beneath this professional exterior, Maria was testing boundaries. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, with minor rule bending. She allowed certain privileges for inmates she deemed safe, overlooked minor infractions, and kept items that were supposed to be confiscated. No one questioned her. She smiled and reassured anyone who looked doubtful, masking the thrill she felt each time she got away with bending the rules. Each small success fueled her confidence, and she started to believe that her position within the jail was a shield against consequences. As weeks turned into months, Maria began observing patterns with precision, mapping out surveillance blind spots and memorizing officers' schedules. She studied the behaviors of both staff and inmates, identifying weak points and opportunities. In her mind, she was no longer just an employee. She was a strategist, orchestrating moves that would benefit her in ways no one could detect. Every unnoticed infraction felt like proof that she was smarter than those around her. Maria's growing sense of invincibility gave her a thrill unlike anything else. She started thinking bigger, imagining ways she could leverage her position for personal gain. Her ambition had evolved from quiet diligence into a calculated audacity. She believed she could manipulate the system, evade detection, and take advantage of her unique access without ever being caught. The jail had become her stage, and she was convinced she was untouchable. Little did anyone know, the web she was weaving would soon draw the attention of people who did not share her blind trust. Maria's first real test of audacity began when she started moving contraband for certain inmates. At first, it seemed harmless extra snacks, small personal items, even books or magazines that were technically not allowed. She justified it to herself, telling herself it was a favor, a way to maintain goodwill, a harmless indulgence. But the thrill of bending rules without consequence quickly became addictive. Each successful smuggling operation reinforced the belief that she was untouchable. Soon, what had started as minor indulgences escalated into something far more serious. Maria realized she could turn her knowledge and position into an opportunity for profit. Friends and family of inmates began offering cash for small items she could easily deliver. At first, she resisted the temptation, but the idea of easy money coupled with the excitement of secrecy proved irresistible. Her operations grew more organized. She memorized patterns, hid contraband in unusual places, and tracked the movements of both officers and inmates with meticulous attention to detail. Her confidence transformed into arrogance. She started testing limits in bolder ways, allowing certain inmates privileges that should have been denied and selectively ignoring protocols that could have exposed her. She learned to manipulate documentation, making subtle changes to logs to cover her tracks. Every success gave her a sense of power, a feeling that she was no longer just an employee, but someone who controlled the flow of information, access, and privilege within the jail. However, cracks were beginning to show in her otherwise flawless scheme. A new officer unfamiliar with the unspoken dynamics Maria had exploited began noticing irregularities. Inventory counts didn't add up, and some inmate behavior seemed unusually coordinated. Cameras captured subtle but suspicious movements, and the new officer flagged these for review. What Maria had considered foolproof was now under scrutiny. Despite the growing risk, Maria's hubris kept her going. She convinced herself that the new officer's suspicions were trivial and that her network of control within the jail was too strong to be challenged. She ignored warning signs, relying on her knowledge of surveillance gaps and staff routines. But the truth was that she had begun drawing attention, not only from colleagues, but from investigators who were starting to piece together patterns that no one could explain. As her actions grew bolder, the stakes rose. The thrill of operating above the rules was intoxicating, but it also meant she was walking a thin line between freedom and exposure. Every decision carried potential consequences far greater than she realized. Maria's calculated moves had become a dangerous game, one that would ultimately test her belief that she was invincible. The investigation into Maria Thompson began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with minor discrepancies in jail records and small missing items that couldn't be easily explained. Administrators initially dismissed them as clerical errors, but as the irregularities piled up, patterns began to emerge. Someone was manipulating the system, and the trail led inevitably to Maria. Despite her careful planning, the cracks in her operation were becoming impossible to ignore. Surveillance footage revealed movements that didn't match recorded schedules. Items appeared and disappeared from secure areas with uncanny precision. Investigators started tracking her activities more closely, cross-referencing logs with camera footage and inmate reports. What had once seemed like minor rule bending was now revealed as an organized scheme. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a woman using her position to manipulate both staff and inmates for her own benefit. Maria remained outwardly calm, convinced that her years of experience and insider knowledge would protect her. She continued her daily routines, confident that no one could catch her in the act. But the investigators were meticulous, documenting every interaction, every irregularity. They began to understand the full scope of her operation: contraband smuggling, falsification of records, and manipulation of inmate privileges. What had seemed like isolated incidents were actually part of a calculated system designed to evade detection and exploit weaknesses within the jail. Colleagues who had once admired Maria were shocked as the investigation unfolded. Many had trusted her implicitly, believing her to be beyond reproach. The realization that someone so trusted could exploit her position so thoroughly left a sense of betrayal among staff. Inmates, too, began to react, some anxious, others emboldened, realizing that Maria's influence was waning. The careful balance of control she had maintained for so long was slipping, and the consequences of her hubris were starting to catch up with her. As the investigation intensified, Maria's arrogance began to falter. She realized that her carefully constructed facade was no longer impenetrable. Every decision, every small manipulation had been observed, and the cumulative evidence was overwhelming. She had underestimated the diligence of those who were determined to uncover the truth. The game she had played for months, perhaps years, was ending, and the consequences of her actions were about to become painfully clear. In the quiet moments before her downfall, Maria must have understood that her sense of invincibility had been an illusion. The investigation had stripped away the protective veneer she had relied on, exposing not just her crimes, but the deep vulnerabilities in the system she had exploited. What remained was a woman who had believed herself untouchable, now, facing the full weight of the law she had thought she could outsmart. The arrest of Maria Thompson was sudden, precise, and inevitable. One morning, she arrived at Jackson County Jail for her shift as usual, unaware that investigators had gathered enough evidence to move against her. Within hours, she was escorted from the facility in handcuffs, the same institution she had once controlled with quiet authority. The shock rippled through staff and inmates alike. Colleagues who had admired her for years struggled to reconcile the professional image they trusted with the criminal reality now exposed. Investigators had compiled a mountain of evidence. Hidden compartments, falsified logs, and surveillance footage all pointed to Maria's orchestrated smuggling operations. Contraband ranging from cell phones to dangerous items had passed through her hands, often without detection. It became clear that her ambitions had grown far beyond the small favors she once justified as harmless. What started as minor bending of rules had evolved into a complex scheme that endangered both inmates and staff. Media coverage exploded as the story became public. News outlets painted Maria as a cunning insider who exploited her position for personal gain, a figure who thought herself above the law. The public was captivated by the audacity of her actions and the seeming invincibility she had carried for so long. Interviews with staff and experts revealed just how meticulously she had planned every move. Each revelation was more shocking than the last. Secret deliveries coordinated with outside contacts, manipulated schedules, and privileges granted to certain inmates in exchange for favors. Her trial was highly publicized, a tense unfolding of deceit and strategy. Testimonies revealed how she had used her knowledge of jail routines and vulnerabilities to operate undetected for months. Evidence showed that she had systematically exploited loopholes, covering her tracks with a combination of charm, authority, and careful planning. The story stunned those who had once trusted her completely, emphasizing how easily authority could be abused when accountability is absent. As the trial concluded, Maria was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Her fall from grace served as a stark example of the dangers of arrogance and unchecked power. The jail implemented stricter protocols, surveillance, and staff training to prevent such incidents in the future. What had once been a story of admiration and trust became a cautionary tale, demonstrating that no matter how clever or confident a person may appear, the law ultimately prevails. Maria's carefully constructed empire within the jail had crumbled, leaving behind lessons in vigilance, accountability, and the consequences of believing oneself untouchable. Maria Thompson's life after her conviction was a stark contrast to the authority and control she once wielded at Jackson County Jail. Behind bars, the very environment she had once manipulated became her reality. The routines, rules, and constant surveillance that she had once exploited were now imposed upon her, and there was no room for manipulation or deceit. The sense of invincibility that had fueled her actions was replaced by confinement and reflection, though Maria remained outwardly defiant, refusing to fully admit the scope of her crimes. The aftermath of her case sent shockwaves through the community and the correctional system. Administrators and law enforcement officials reevaluated policies and procedures, implementing stricter oversight to prevent another employee from exploiting their position. Cameras were upgraded, logs were closely audited, and staff were trained to recognize signs of internal misconduct. Maria's actions had exposed vulnerabilities that had been ignored for years, and her case became a blueprint for improving accountability. Her colleagues continued to grapple with the betrayal. Many had trusted her implicitly, believing her professionalism and dedication were genuine. The revelation that someone so respected could manipulate the system shook morale and trust within the jail. Inmates, too, adjusted their behavior, recognizing that the individual who had once held sway over privileges and contraband was no longer a factor. The ripple effect of Maria's actions reached far beyond her own sentence, reshaping the culture of the institution and emphasizing the importance of checks and balances. Public interest in her case remained high. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and legal analysts dissected her story, fascinated by the combination of cunning, audacity, and hubris that had defined her career. Each detail of her manipulation, from falsified logs to secret deliveries, highlighted how one person's ambition could threaten an entire system. In this sense, Maria Thompson became a cautionary tale, a stark example of how unchecked authority and arrogance can lead to downfall. Ultimately, her story serves as a reminder that no one is above the law. Even those who seem untouchable, who operate within systems of power and trust, are subject to accountability. Maria's rise and fall illustrated the dangers of believing in personal invulnerability and exploiting positions of trust. For the community, the staff, and even the inmates she once influenced, the case left a lasting lesson. Vigilance, oversight, and integrity are essential, and justice, however delayed, has a way of prevailing. Her story is remembered not only for the crimes she committed, but for the system-wide changes that followed, ensuring that her audacity would never go unnoticed again.